There's a predator on the loose in Louisiana.
She fought tooth and nail. There was literally blood from one end of her apartment to the other.
Who could have done this?
He strikes whenever he chooses, unseen by anyone, never leaving a single trace behind.
I described him as a ghost early on.
These series of murders changed every woman in Baton Rouge. I began sleeping with a loaded gun underneath my pillow.
If I didn't find this person as soon as possible, another woman would die.
Can I help you?
Baton Rouge, Louisiana is a bustling city that prides itself on its laid-back southern hospitality.
Baton Rouge is the capital of Louisiana, and its metropolitan area is about 500,000 people, but it still retains its small-town atmosphere. Everybody knows everybody. People are friendly here.
In the spring of 2002, Charlotte Murray Pace, Murray to her closest friends, is settling into her new home in the university area of the city. Just 22 years old, the determined young woman has a bright future ahead of her.
Murray Pace was the all-American girl. She had grown up in a very loving family. She was very ambitious, and she was preparing to go out into the big world and make something of herself.
She was smart. She was graduated from high school when she was 15, college when she was 20, had her MBA when she was 22.
Murray has just moved into a small townhouse for the summer with a friend.
She graduated in May and was going to work at LSU for the summer and go in August to Atlanta to start her real life, as she said, her grown-up life.
Just a few more months to linger in Baton Rouge, free from worry. Or so she thinks. Just 2 days after moving in, she comes home from her job at the Alumni Association for a lunch. Two hours later, her roommate returns to an eerie silence.
Charlotte?
Upstairs, a scene of horrific savagery. Murray is beyond help.
It was one of the most graphic homicide scenes we'd seen. There was a tremendous amount of blood, and it was a rather vicious attack. There were several weapons that were used, probably the worst being the iron to bludgeon the victim.
The coroner estimates she's been dead for a couple of hours. There are dozens of tiny holes in her abdomen and chest, and her throat has been slashed. Nearly nude, it also looks like she's been raped. Biological stains that appear to be semen glow fluorescent under the ultraviolet light. Further evidence that this was a sexual attack. Analysis of the stains and an internal examination at the morgue will provide confirmation.
There were defensive wounds. It was obvious that she put up the fight of her life.
Murray was a very athletic person. She fought tooth and nail. There was literally blood from one end of her apartment to the other.
Murray's wallet is missing. So are her car keys, her cell phone, and a silver bracelet.
It was a very confusing crime scene. Police didn't know if they were dealing with a robbery gone bad or if the victim had just been a target of this person who had done this horrible thing.
When the roommate came home, the doors were locked. With no sign of forced entry, police assumed the killer must have been someone she knew. And according to her roommate, the popular, outgoing Murray knew lots of people and had many friends.
The dearest thing about her was her friends. She loved them. I mean, and they loved her. And I think that's an enormous tribute to her, is her ability to be a wonderful friend.
Murray had also been warm and outgoing, even as a child.
She was born in 1979. From the get-go, she was confident and fun and feisty. She always had these big blue eyes open wide, and these little curls were always flying behind her because she was always running. I mean, even now I can see her running across the room and jumping up in my lap. And I can still close my eyes, and I can feel those little curls right here, and I can smell her little baby skin.
Hard to believe anyone would have a reason to kill this bright, beautiful young woman.
There was no boyfriend in the picture. So police had to wonder what kind of person was filled with so much rage and so passionate about killing that he would brutalize a young girl the way this killer did.
And why take so many risks? Murray was attacked in the middle of the day in one of Baton Rouge's busiest neighborhoods.
This incident was right on the outside of the campus of LSU, Louisiana State University. It's a major thoroughfare for students going to and from the school.
In such a busy area, someone had to have seen the killer. Police combed the neighborhood for information or witnesses.
We canvassed, and we begged people for information, and not one piece.
Police questioned Murray's friends and neighbors. Is it possible she opened the door to someone she knew? Someone with a grudge. But no one seems to fit the bill. And yet somebody unleashed a murderous rampage that afternoon. The medical examiner determines that Murray was stabbed with a screwdriver 81 times. He confirms that she was also raped and sends samples of her assailant's semen to the DNA lab.
Our hope is it's somebody we know. If we had someone within that inner circle and we had that DNA evidence available to us, then we thought we could solve it fairly quickly.
The DNA is checked against a database of known offenders.
Nothing in the database.
We ran and did not get a hit. If we don't find a suspect immediately, we look and see if there are similar crimes that occurred anywhere else in the immediate area.
One unsolved crime quickly jumps out. Before Murray moved to the university area, she'd been living 3 miles away on Stanford Avenue. 8 months before she had moved, a horrific crime had occurred just 3 doors down from her old place. When 41-year-old divorced nurse Gina Green doesn't show up for work, a colleague checks on her and makes a grim discovery. She'd been strangled to death and raped. As with Charlotte Murray Pace's murder, there was no sign of forced entry, and the killer walked away with her purse and cell phone.
Murray Pace was a neighbor of Gina Green and had moved right before her death. That sent up a serious signal that there could be a connection between those two.
After speaking with Gina's friends and family, police obtained some unsettling information.
Gina didn't show up for work, so after my shift I thought
Gina Wilson Green, in the days before her murder, had mentioned to several of her friends and her mother that she felt like someone was watching her. Charlotte Murray Pace had moved from Stanford Avenue, so I believe that the killer was watching her and stalking her and followed her to her new residence.
Authorities' suspicions are confirmed when DNA tests reveal Gina and Murray share the same unknown killer. Police double down, bringing in more officers. They hit the streets and open a tip line. But this phantom predator leaves no witnesses and no trace. And it's only a matter of time before his lust for blood drives him to kill again. DNA has tied the brutal death of 22-year-old Charlotte Murray Pace to the murder of a former neighbor, Gina Green. But police can find no other connection, and they haven't got a single lead on a suspect.
We know we've got multiple killings now, and we know that at any day there could be another. My fear at this point that if I didn't find this person as soon as possible, another woman would die.
And a month later, it seems like his worst fear may have come true. 6 weeks after the murder of Murray Pace, Byron Kinnamore comes home from a nearby casino. A simple pleasure, since an auto accident left him confined to a wheelchair.
Pam met Byron at a dinner party, and it was love at first sight. They dated about 2 years and then decided to get married. And his mother called me one night and said, "What do you think about your daughter marrying a man in a wheelchair?" And I said, if anybody can get him on his feet, she can. And he stood up at the altar to get married. And then when they rolled down the aisle in a wheelchair, she sat on his lap. And it was a very, very happy marriage.
Since her car is in the driveway, Byron assumes Pam is home, but she isn't responding. Then he sees a few drops of blood on the bathroom floor. He searches outside, but his wife is nowhere to be found. Pam's mother, Lynn Marino, gets a panicked call from Byron.
Her husband said, "Pam is missing." I said, "What do you mean Pam is missing? She's probably at a movie." He said, "No, Lynn, Pam is not here. Her car's here, she's not here. Her keys are here."
Byron calls the police, and they send an officer to the house.
Here's the blood I was talking about, officer.
He tells police it looked like Pam had been doing her nails and having a bath. Other than a small plant that's knocked over, there are no signs of a disturbance in the house. Police are at a loss.
Just because someone is missing from a home and there's blood found at the scene does not necessarily mean there's something of violence that has happened. Possibly someone was hurt and went to a hospital, or they ran to a neighbor's house, or they went to a relative's house.
They just took the attitude that she wasn't home, not really that she was missing. It just wasn't like Pam. Pam was very responsible. That's what I tried to tell them. But they said they can't do anything about it. It has to be so many hours with an adult before you can say that they're missing.
While police follow up with all the local hospitals, Byron calls anyone and everyone his wife knows, with no luck. 2 days later, there's still no sign of her. Her cell phone records show no usage since she disappeared. With no leads, the investigation stalls. The family offers a $75,000 reward for information leading to Pam's safe return, but no one comes forward to claim it. Pam Kinnamore has simply vanished, and as the days pass, any hope that she'll be found alive is fading fast. Based on what they know about Pam Kinnamore, police don't think she took off on her own, and within days, they get the proof. 30 miles from Baton Rouge, on a hot July morning, a highway survey crew finds a body on the shores of Whiskey Bay. 4 days after she disappeared, Pam Kinnamore is no longer a missing person. A pathologist finds 3 deep cuts, 4 to 5 inches long, on her neck. She was also sexually assaulted. A semen sample is sent for DNA analysis.
It's hard to believe that she was gone and she'd never be back. At that stage, I was thinking, who could have done this to somebody like Pam? Why would somebody do that?
After the Pam Kinnamore abduction and murder, we had the bad feeling that we were dealing with a single perpetrator here that was killing white females in the Baton Rouge area.
DNA results from Pam Kinnamore confirm his gut feeling. The monster has struck again. Far from being scared off by all the police attention, he's getting bolder. In 10 months, he's savagely killed at least 3 women. The city of Baton Rouge is thrown into a state of panic. as police call in major reinforcements to hunt down the sadistic predator.
We immediately met at the FBI headquarters here in Baton Rouge and invited all the top local law enforcement here in the area, including the U.S. Attorney's Office and the DA's office, to discuss our plan of action of what we should do and how we should develop an investigative group to go forward.
But even with all the extra manpower, it's going to be an uphill battle. The killer is brazen, unpredictable, and highly elusive.
It's almost unheard of that you have not a witness to any case, let alone no witness or anything suspicious on 3 different cases. I described him as a ghost early on.
Following an urgent news conference, a woman calls in with a critical tip. She was driving towards Whiskey Bay at 3 a.m. on July 13th, 7 hours after Pam Kennemore disappeared, when she spotted a white truck heading down the access road that leads to where the body was found. There are 27,000 white pickup trucks registered in Louisiana, and every one of their owners is suddenly in the hot seat.
We were looking for someone with a past history of violence and sex offenses.
But just when the task force thinks they're closing the net, this stealth killer proves just how untouchable he really is. In the summer of 2002, fear grips the city of Baton Rouge as police continue the hunt for the phantom serial killer who's claimed the lives of at least 3 young women in less than a year.
I believe that these series of murders changed every woman in Baton Rouge. As the murders escalated and more occurred, I began sleeping with a loaded gun underneath my pillow.
It was always personal for me. Women were dying, and I was responsible for stopping that. We knew we were going to have to find him through our evidence that we had established.
Lynn Marino believes that the best way to keep police working 24/7 on finding her daughter's killer is to keep media attention focused on the 3 victims.
Kim will be dead a year, July the 12th. I realized that it would be important to keep that message with the media and keep that news on the front page, that people would stay alert. NBC put up 2 big signs that Pam Kennemore was missing in the police hotline, and her picture and the reward. Pam had been linked to Gina Green and to Murray Pace. When they interviewed me, I said, I'm not a policeman, but I know when 3 bodies are linked by DNA to the same person, that's a serial killer.
The victims' families channel their grief and pain into action, demanding even more resources to catch the killer.
Well, it was a very personal expression today as, again, families of the serial killer's victims gathered on the steps of the state capitol.
We started having rallies on the steps of the Capitol the 3rd Sunday of the month.
It's so powerful to look at that. I was emotionally overwhelmed to see that.
It was important to keep the case before the public because you were trying to warn people there was a serial killer out there, and you also felt that there were people there who knew this person.
I think it saved lives. From the bottom of my heart, it saved lives.
Lynn Marino calls on Louisiana Governor Tom Foster for action.
I said, detectives that said they would come and help us. My only concern was getting this serial killer so that other families would not have to go through the grief and the hurt that we have had to endure with the loss of a family member.
After speaking with her, the governor orders Louisiana State Police to expand the task force, which has moved into a new headquarters at the Emergency Preparedness Building. The FBI puts one of their most experienced criminal profilers on the case, with an impressive track record for catching serial killers, Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole.
In a perfect world, investigators come to a profiler and say, tell us the kind of person that would commit these crimes or this series of crimes. An FBI profiler would then come back after reviewing the crime scene or the series of crime scenes and provide investigators with a personality overview of the person that they are looking for.
I was told by Mary Ellen O'Toole, your mind will not go in places that their mind goes, so don't attempt to. You'll drive yourself more crazy.
They had connected Miss Green, Miss Pace, and Miss Kennemore's crime scenes through DNA. So they already had those three cases connected. So when I went down there, we were talking more about the kind of person that could be responsible for these crimes. And between the three, there was a different cause of death. There were different weapons that were used. The victims were treated differently. They were in close proximity to one another geographically. And then in the third case, the victim was actually removed from her home and her body was ultimately found in another location. So there was so much variety in these crime scenes. If you have an offender with a high degree of impulsivity, in my experience, you're going to have a lot more variation in his crime scenes across time.
O'Toole's visits to the crime scenes not only tell her a lot about her killer, but also about the women whose lives he's taken.
In these cases, the victims were, from a behavioral perspective, very low-risk victims. In other words, they were victims whose lifestyles, where they lived, you would never anticipate that they would become the victim of a violent crime.
Even though the victims were low risk, the crimes themselves were the exact opposite.
You go into someone's home and you kill them, and they have neighbors and they live on a busy street. You have to take note of that, because that's pretty high risk for an offender to go inside someone's home who has neighbors all around.
This killer is fearless, striking in the middle of the day, not worrying about being seen or caught, not breaking into homes, but clearly sweet-talking his way inside.
There were a million things at any one of these places he was in. We knew that he spent a tremendous amount of time in Charlotte Murray Pace's townhouse. It was the thrill of what was going on in there that made him do what he did and not worry about the chances of getting caught.
As O'Toole studies the crime scenes, she also suspects that the killer targets his victims long before he attacks.
There was following behavior, not stalking behavior, but following behavior. Stalking behavior is where you know I'm watching you. And following means the victim's not even aware of it.
Mary Ellen O'Toole had told us that this person had a history of probably being caught picking up women at bars. He would continue to place himself in the vicinity of women or places that women frequent.
He's clearly strong enough to carry out such extremely violent acts, but O'Toole believes he wouldn't have come across threatening at first meeting.
The picture I started to put together of this offender was someone who, when you first met them, they would come across as glib and charming. They'd be able to talk their way into a situation. Someone who had that ability to schmooze, so victims wouldn't feel necessarily put off by him until maybe it was too late.
Time to turn this information over to the public and hope this profile rings a bell with someone somewhere.
We were appealing to that one or two individuals that already probably had a suspicion that their loved one, their son, their husband, boyfriend, was very likely involved in something like this.
The task force is inundated with tips. One by one, officers start weeding through a rapidly expanding suspect list, acquiring DNA swabs from anyone who might fit the bill.
When you look at the thousands of so-called suspects that we had, they met every race that you can think of. I was reaching out to every DNA lab in this country, trying to see if from that DNA they could tell us the race of the person.
But before they come up with any fresh leads, another young woman's body is found 20 miles outside of town. She's been raped and killed by blunt trauma to the head. Is this murder also the work of the serial killer they're hunting? It's unlike the others in two key ways. First, the woman was snatched not from her home, but from a cemetery where she'd been visiting her mother's grave. And there's another difference that confounds investigators. 23-year-old Trinisha Dene Colon is African American.
It seems like every time we had a different victim here, it changed our profile. It changed how we were thinking. We had gone completely off the realm of what was a normal type of behavior by a serial killer in the United States. We were dealing with someone who had just gone through a number of different victims, a number of different methods of death, and now he's changed races.
The mysterious white pickup truck comes back to haunt them. 7 months after the first sighting, a witness in Lafayette reports seeing a suspicious white man in a white pickup in the vicinity of the latest murder just before the body was discovered. Police follow up this tantalizing lead without results. But the tip has given them a new crucial lead. Their killer is likely to be white. But the investigation still can't gain any traction, and several months go by with no leads and no new deaths. Then, in Whiskey Bay, not far from where Pam Kinnemore's body was found 8 months earlier, a fisherman makes a gruesome discovery. The woman, identified as 26-year-old LSU student Carrie Lynn Yoder, has been strangled, beaten, and raped. DNA confirms it. The ghost of Baton Rouge has claimed the life of a fifth young woman. At the state capitol, candlelight vigils are held as families grapple with unbearable loss.
This was the longest, probably 10 months of my life. Every day was a struggle. Every day was agony. Dealing with the victims' families and knowing that this guy could strike at any other moment in time and there'd be another victim. I don't think anybody understands what a horrible responsibility that was. It was gut-wrenching at best.
2 years and 8 months after his first known murder, with the body count up to 5, it's feeling like this predator may never be caught. Until a witness comes forward with a harrowing story. Is she the only victim of the ghost of Baton Rouge who has lived to tell her tale?
Can I help you?
Police in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, have taken DNA samples from nearly 1,000 men in search for a vicious serial killer who's already claimed the lives of 5 young women. But even with a massive task force working around the clock, they don't have a single viable suspect. Desperate for new leads, FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole comes up with an unusual suggestion.
We need to look for survivors.
Look for clues among the living, not the dead.
These killers are not 100% successful, so it's very logical to look for survivors. So it becomes important as investigators through contacts with other police agencies to say, tell us about any police reports in which somebody was sexually assaulted or hurt but survived the assault. So look for those kinds of cases where it was an incomplete homicide.
Turning to the public for help, law enforcement deliberately keeps their description of the monster vague.
I wrote that profile that went into the newspaper, and I did not put a race into that profile. The reason I didn't is because we had African American victims, we had Caucasian victims. We were reluctant to put any race in there because of the variation.
The unusual strategy pays off when the team hears about an attack that took place in a town 60 miles west of Baton Rouge, 8 months prior to the latest murder. The victim is 47-year-old Diane Alexander. The only problem is she doesn't want to talk.
her case was still unsolved, and she had been so terribly beaten physically and emotionally traumatized by what happened to her. I explained to her that what I was looking for were behaviors by whoever had done that to her, to see if there were similarities and or differences between behaviors at the crime scenes, the murder scenes in Baton Rouge.
After listening to O'Toole, Diane reluctantly tells them her story.
It was just a normal day.
She said she had come home from a store. She was preparing to go to work, and she heard a knock on the door. She said there was this very handsome man and asked to borrow her phone.
Diane Alexander got him a phone and a phone book, closed and locked her door.
She went back to what she was doing to get ready for work. There was another knock on the door.
She opened the door. He forced his way in and hit her with her own telephone and began to viciously attack and rape her. As he was raping Diane Alexander, he whispered into her ear, "I've been watching you." Fortunately, at that moment, the killer heard her son driving up the driveway, and he ran out the back door.
Diane was severely beaten, and her son walked in.
He sees his mother lying on the floor, bleeding profusely, and catches a glimpse of someone running out the back.
And her son chases him and is able to provide investigators with some information.
Diane Alexander's son saw a black man.
Diane confirms her son's description. The man who attacked her was African American. Could investigators have been led astray by reports that it was a white man driving the suspicious pickup truck? Is it really possible Diane's assailant is the ghost of Baton Rouge?
We had a very good feeling that the individual who attacked Diane Alexander in Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, was responsible for the murders of the women that the task force were investigating.
DNA collected from Diane's attack proves it. A perfect match to all the other crime scenes. Diane gives police her first detailed description of the predator they've been hunting for so long. And he doesn't look anything like the previous police sketches.
After months of agonizing over this case, hopefully we were finally putting a face on the ghost that we had been looking for that had terrorized this community for way too long.
They then took the composite that was drawn with the behavioral information that I had given to the chief along with my colleagues, and he put that out in the press.
Just a few hours after the sketch goes public, investigators get a call from police in a nearby town of Zachary. They recognize the sketch immediately. It's a man they've recently questioned about a Peeping Tom incident. His name is Derrick Todd Lee. Now, the ghost has a name as well as a face.
Once we had the name Derrick Todd Lee, we immediately went into gathering information about him. Within about an hour, we had just about every piece of information we could have on an individual.
At age 33, Lee appears to be a polite and charming family man. It's hard to believe that he's the right guy. But as the task force digs deeper, they find Lee has a history of trouble with the law, going back to his childhood. Assault, burglary, peeping and stalking charges continue to pile up through his 20s. Then Lee seems to turn his life around. He works in construction, gets married, has 2 kids, and shows no sign of being violent or dangerous. The team gets another call from the Zachary police that will provide their biggest break yet.
Derrick Todd Lee. Yeah, we have a DNA sample.
Derrick Todd Lee's DNA.
The Attorney General's office investigating another homicide in the Zachary area had taken his swab probably 6 or 8 months prior to the actual swab being tested.
The DNA is rushed into the lab for comparison, and when the results come back, investigators know they've found their man at last.
The DNA test confirmed that there was no doubt it was him. I think the elephant got lifted off my chest at that point. I finally felt like I could breathe. I hadn't breathed in a long time. Not like that. It was a very good moment for a lot of reasons.
When the arrest warrant is issued, the task force takes no chances, knowing that Lee could be armed and is extremely dangerous.
Derrick Todd, Lee, open up. It's the FBI.
But there's no sign of Lee, his wife, or their 2 children. Investigators learn that Lee's wife, Jacqueline, pulled their kids out of school weeks ago, the very day that police took the DNA swab from Lee.
We knew that we had a problem. He was on the run. We had a dangerous person, and we did everything we could to try to establish his capture as quickly as possible.
Lee's sister tells police the family moved to Atlanta without explanation or a forwarding address. She gave Lee her cell phone to take with him. Police immediately tracked the phone. Baton Rouge detectives joined forces with Atlanta police, U.S. Marshals, and the FBI for a massive manhunt. But even with a tracker on his cell phone, finding a fugitive in a city this size is not going to be easy. Will the ghost of Baton Rouge slip through their clutches once more and continue his bloodbath? Wanted for the murders of 5 women in Louisiana, Derrick Todd Lee flees the state. By tracing the cell phone he has with him, police track him down to an Atlanta housing project and prepare to arrest him.
We coordinated our people together, and we were able to locate the proximity to where he was, so it was a well-coordinated apprehension of him at that point.
But Lee is a desperate man, highly impulsive, extremely violent, and liable to do anything when cornered. After months of terror, the ghost of Baton Rouge is taken down without a struggle.
Get on the ground. Down. On the ground. Move. Derrick Todd, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You understand those rights? Yeah. Okay, get him up. Get in the car.
Lee was arrested without incident. Lee will be booked into the Fulton County Sheriff's Department jail as a fugitive from Baton Rouge on a first-degree murder and aggravated rape charge. Wednesday morning, Todd will appear in court in Atlanta for extradition proceedings.
Lee chooses not to fight extradition from Georgia, and within a few hours, he's behind bars in Baton Rouge.
The day they got Derrick Todd Lee was in May, and it was close to my birthday. And the media called me right away and asked could they come to my house and get a statement. I said, my statement is, this will be the happiest birthday of my life to have him apprehended.
The day following his arrest and bringing him back to Baton Rouge was probably one of the most emotional days in my life. The responsibility that I carried in dealing with those families that lost their kids was probably more than I could bear. And it just, I melted down for a day, and it just, then I had to go on.
The next day, detectives grill their suspect at length. They already have his DNA at the crime scenes, but a confession would make it an ironclad case. But that's not going to happen. Instead, to everyone's surprise, Lee asks to speak with criminal profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole.
He asked me to come in to talk to him, and then he turned his back on me. Just turned his back on me. And I thought, well, why did you want me to come in here? And then it was just a short period of time, minutes, and then he turned around to me again and started talking in a very confident voice and very engaging. Said, "Did you write that profile?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "I read that profile." And he said, "Do you think you know me?" And I said, "Well, I think I know about you." My time with him was very short. It was under 20 minutes. He didn't become physical. He didn't threaten me. He didn't try to hit me. But his behavior went from ignoring me to acting very engaging, very appropriate, charming, to being inappropriately flirtatious with me. He was an incredibly articulate man, so I got it at that point. It was very clear. Yes, that's exactly how he was able to get close to so many people. You would never look at him and say, "That's the serial killer in Baton Rouge."
The prosecution decides that of all the killings attributed to Lee, they have the highest chance of conviction in the Murray Pace murder.
The state chose to try Lee on the Charlotte Murray Pace case because of the amount of evidence that we had at that location at that point.
Lee pleads not guilty to the charge of first-degree murder, but after a month-long trial, the jury takes less than 2 hours to find him guilty. He is sentenced to death.
So I was standing right there, and as they putting him in a van, I said, "You big fat coward, who's laughing now? Killing all of those innocent women." And he bumped his head. They had to put his head down to put him in. He knew me when he saw me.
He was a human predator, and it was more than just sexual assault. He liked killing. I think he liked the excitement of it. I think he liked the thrill of it. I think he loved the power and the control. And that combination caused him to be clearly very dangerous. And he would have gone on killing until he was stopped. Of that, we had no question.
Nobody's really sure how many women Derrick Todd Lee murdered, but some investigators believe his killing spree began as early as 1992.
Over the decade that Derrick Todd Lee was killing, which was 1992 roughly to 2003, there were 60 cases of missing or murdered women in the Baton Rouge area that had not been solved by police. I took a timeline of Derrick Todd Lee's life, where he was working, what kind of vehicle he was driving, what was going on in his life, his proximity to some of these unsolved cases, and came up with 17 possible victims that could be directly tied to him.
Today, Lee sits on death row at Louisiana's notorious Angola prison, waiting to be executed by lethal injection.
I think the death penalty is absolutely suited for Derrick Todd Lee. And I think in cases of conviction on DNA, it should not drag on for 20 or 25 years. And my biggest reason, it is a deterrent. When Derrick Todd Lee was sentenced to death for Murray Pace, he messed in his pants walking out of the courthouse. Now, this big, brave guy, he doesn't want to die. Nobody wants to die.